The Zentari Empire had ruled the Andromeda sector for 3,000 years without anyone daring to challenge them. Their ships were the biggest and their weapons were the strongest in known space. Every species they encountered either joined them peacefully or was forced to submit after a brief and one-sided battle. The Empire had grown so powerful that they stopped expecting resistance entirely. Commander Vexthal stood on the bridge of his massive warship called the Eternal Dominion. The vessel was 5 kilometers long and carried enough firepower to destroy an entire planet if needed. He had served the Empire for 40 years and had seen dozens of species kneel before Zentari might. Today should have been just another routine patrol along the outer borders of their territory. His scanning officer suddenly spoke up with confusion in his voice. The officer pointed at the holographic display showing a small vessel drifting near the edge of their space. The ship was tiny compared to their dreadnought and appeared badly damaged. Burn marks covered its hull and several sections looked like they had been hit by weapons fire or asteroids. Vexthal ordered his crew to analyze the unknown vessel. The tactical officer worked quickly and reported that the ship used a primitive fusion drive for power. Its armor was basic metal plating that any Zentari weapon could punch through easily. The weapons it carried seemed outdated by at least a century compared to Empire technology. Everything about the vessel screamed weakness and technological inferiority. The commander decided to hail the damaged ship and see what kind of creatures were inside. The view screen flickered and showed the interior of the alien vessel. A woman with short brown hair appeared on the screen. She looked tired and her uniform was wrinkled, but her eyes were sharp and alert. The uniform was blue with strange symbols on the shoulder that Vexthal did not recognize. The woman introduced herself as Captain Linda Hayes of the Earth vessel Wanderer. She explained calmly that her ship had been damaged during a survey mission in deep space. They were not looking for trouble and only wanted safe passage through Zentari territory. Linda spoke clearly and without fear despite facing a warship that could vaporize her vessel in seconds. Vexthal found himself amused by the captain's calm demeanor. He told her that he had never heard of Earth or her species before. The commander then demanded that she surrender her ship immediately and submit to Imperial authority. This was standard procedure when encountering unknown vessels in Empire space. Most species complied quickly once they saw the size difference between their ships. Linda Hayes did not comply. She said she could not surrender her vessel and politely repeated that they just wanted to pass through without conflict. The captain explained they would be gone within a few hours if allowed to continue on their way. Her tone remained respectful but firm as she spoke. Vexthal felt his amusement turn to irritation. He informed the human captain that she misunderstood the situation completely. This was not a negotiation or a request that she could decline. The Empire did not ask for permission, and it certainly did not tolerate defiance from primitive species piloting damaged scout ships. Something changed in Linda Hayes when he said those words. Her tired eyes suddenly showed something dangerous lurking beneath the surface. She leaned back in her command chair and spoke very quietly. The captain said she had 47 crew members aboard her ship, who had been traveling through deep space for 8 months. They were tired and hungry and very far from their home. All they wanted was to pass through peacefully and reach the next navigation beacon. Linda then added that Vexthal should not make this situation harder than it needed to be. The warning was delivered so calmly that it took the commander a moment to realize he had just been threatened by a captain whose ship he could destroy with a single shot. Vexthal laughed at the audacity. He ordered his weapons officer to disable the human ship's engines with a targeted strike. They would take the crew prisoner and study their technology before deciding what to do with them. The Empire could always use more servants, and these humans seemed to have spirit if nothing else. The tactical officer suddenly shouted a warning. The human ship's reactor was spiking in power output at an alarming rate. Something was charging up inside that damaged vessel, and the energy readings were climbing rapidly. Vexthal dismissed the concern and ordered his crew to fire immediately. Bright particle beams lanced out from the Eternal Dominion and struck the Wanderer's defensive shields. The commander expected the shields to collapse instantly under the assault. Instead, they held firm and absorbed the energy without even flickering. Before Vexthal could process this impossibility, something emerged from the human ship's scarred hull. Sleek missile pods opened along the Wanderer's sides in positions that had been completely invisible to Zentari scanners. The pods had been hidden so well that they looked like battle damage until they activated. Dozens of missiles streaked out toward the massive dreadnought, moving faster than anything Vexthal had ever seen. The commander screamed orders for evasive action, but the Eternal Dominion was built for power, not speed. The human missiles weaved through the Zentari point defense systems like they were not even there. The defensive guns fired frantically but could not track the incredibly fast projectiles. Each missile seemed to know exactly where the defensive fire would be and adjusted its course to avoid it. When the missiles hit, everything went wrong at once. The Eternal Dominion's shields collapsed completely under the first impact. 3 missiles punched straight through the heavy armor plating that was supposed to stop anything short of another dreadnought's main guns. The warheads detonated deep inside the ship in critical locations that should have been impossible for the humans to know about. Alarms screamed throughout the bridge as multiple sections reported catastrophic damage. Atmosphere vented into space through massive holes in the hull. The engineering deck reported that 2 of the main reactors had been knocked offline. Weapon systems were failing across the entire ship. In less than 30 seconds, a primitive damaged scout vessel had crippled one of the Empire's most powerful warships. Vexthal stared at the tactical display in complete shock. On the view screen, Linda Hayes stood up from her command chair. She looked at him with those dangerous eyes and spoke with the same calm voice. The captain said she had given him a chance to do this peacefully. She explained that what he had just attacked was not a simple scout vessel at all. The Wanderer was actually a deep space reconnaissance frigate carrying enough firepower to level a small moon. Linda added that right now the commander had about 30 seconds before her crew got creative with the missiles they had not used yet. The threat was delivered as a simple statement of fact rather than a boast. Vexthal's pride and confidence shattered in an instant. He shouted orders to cease fire immediately and tried to keep the panic out of his voice. His tactical officer confirmed that the human ship still had over 60 missiles in its tubes and the reactor was charging what appeared to be some kind of energy weapon. Linda Hayes nodded as if she had expected his surrender. She told Vexthal that her ship would be leaving now and they would not bother the Empire again. Then the captain leaned forward and delivered a message that would change everything. She said the commander should tell his superiors that humanity was not interested in Zentari territory or politics or wars, but if the Empire attacked humans again, the response would not be so merciful next time. The Wanderer's engines flared with blue fire and the ship accelerated impossibly fast before jumping into faster-than-light travel. The human vessel vanished, leaving the crippled Eternal Dominion floating helplessly in space. Emergency repair crews scrambled to patch the hull breaches while the bridge crew worked to restore basic systems. Vexthal stood frozen for a long time, just staring at the empty space where the human ship had been. He had served the Empire for 40 years and fought in a dozen wars. He had seen species with advanced technology and powerful weapons, but he had never felt true fear until today. Something about the way Captain Hayes had spoken and the casual efficiency with which she had disabled his ship filled him with dread. The commander, finally, moved and ordered his communication officer to send a priority message to the Imperial Council on the homeworld. They needed to know immediately that the Empire had encountered a new species. More importantly, they needed to understand that these humans were far more dangerous than anyone could have anticipated. The Imperial Council chamber floated high above the capital city of Zentara Prime, like a massive crystal dome that caught the light of 3 suns. 12 high counselors sat in their elevated positions, forming a circle around the center of the chamber. Their bodies were projected as enormous holograms that made them look like giants looking down on whoever stood below them. This design was intentional to remind everyone of the Empire's power and dominance. High Chancellor Miracor listened to Commander Vexathal's report with growing anger rather than concern. The commander stood in the center of the chamber looking small and defeated. His uniform was still dirty from the emergency repairs his crew had performed on the crippled Eternal Dominion. He spoke clearly about everything that had happened during the encounter with the human vessel, but his voice carried the weight of shame. Miracor interrupted the commander's report with barely controlled fury in her voice. She asked Vexthal to confirm that a single damaged vessel from an unknown species had managed to cripple one of their most powerful dreadnoughts. The question was asked in a way that made it clear. She thought the answer was impossible. Vexthal confirmed that everything in his report was accurate and added that the human technology was far more advanced than initial scans had suggested. The missiles moved faster than anything in the Zentari arsenal and seemed to predict where defensive fire would be. The reactor output from such a small ship should have been impossible according to everything they knew about physics and engineering. Counselor Drakmar slammed his appendage against his console, making a loud sound that echoed through the chamber. He declared that the entire story was ridiculous and made no sense. No primitive species that had just achieved faster than light travel could possibly defeat a Zentari warship in combat. Either Vexthal had made a terrible mistake in his tactics, or he was lying to cover up his own incompetence. The commander insisted that the threat was very real and that the council needed to take it seriously. He explained that the human captain had spoken with absolute confidence and had shown remarkable restraint. Captain Hayes could have destroyed the Eternal Dominion completely, but instead she had disabled it and warned them not to attack again. That kind of measured response suggested military discipline and strategic thinking rather than lucky shots. Miracor waved one of her appendages in a dismissive gesture that was common among the Zentari when they did not want to hear more. She stated that one lucky encounter did not constitute a real threat to an empire that controlled 83 star systems. Perhaps the humans had stumbled upon some experimental weapons technology, or perhaps their missiles had simply hit critical systems by chance. Regardless of the explanation, the Empire could not allow this insult to go unpunished. Drakmar eagerly agreed with the High Chancellor and suggested they send a full battle group to investigate these humans and locate their homeworld. If the species truly possessed advanced technology, then the Empire would take it by force, as they had done with dozens of other species. If the humans had simply been lucky, then the Empire would eliminate them as an example to anyone else who might consider resistance. Vexthal felt cold fear run through his body. He strongly advised against any aggressive action toward the humans without attempting diplomatic contact first. The commander suggested they should learn more about this species before committing military forces. He reminded the council that Captain Hayes had specifically warned them not to attack again, and that warning had not sounded like a bluff. Miracor cut him off mid-sentence and informed him that his advice was noted but completely dismissed. The High Chancellor then announced that Vexthal was relieved of his command immediately, pending a full investigation into his failure. The Empire did not tolerate officers who lost battles to inferior opponents regardless of the circumstances. The hologram of Admiral Korseth suddenly leaned forward with an eager expression on his scarred face. Korseth was a legendary warrior who had fought in over 100 battles and never lost a single one. His body was covered in scars from various weapons, and his reputation for ruthlessness was known throughout the Empire. The Admiral volunteered to lead the expedition to find Earth and bring back the humans' surrender. Miracor accepted immediately and gave Korseth full authority to assemble a battle group of 20 warships. The High Chancellor wanted this matter resolved quickly and decisively. She ordered the Admiral to make an example of the humans so that no other species would dare to resist the Empire in the future. Korseth promised to return within 1 standard month with either the humans' complete surrender or proof of their total destruction. As the council dismissed him, Vexthal walked slowly from the chamber, feeling the weight of failure and dread pressing down on him. He had seen the cold calculation in Captain Linda Hayes' eyes during their brief confrontation. The way she had disabled his ship with surgical precision spoke of experience and preparation. The Empire was making a catastrophic mistake, but no one would listen to warnings from a disgraced commander. He could only hope that when the truth became clear, it would not cost the Empire everything. Far across the galaxy in deep space, the Wanderer dropped out of faster-than-light travel near a hidden relay station that humans had established years ago. The station was small and automated, designed to boost communication signals across the vast distances between Earth and its exploration vessels. Captain Linda Hayes sat in her command chair reviewing damage reports with her chief engineer, Peter Cole. Peter scrolled through the data on his tablet and muttered that things had been closer than he liked. The ship's main reactor was running at only 40% capacity after the power surge needed to charge their weapons. 3 of their missile tubes had jammed during the firing sequence and would need major repairs. The shields had held, but the generators were showing signs of stress from absorbing the Zentari particle beams. Linda acknowledged the damage, but pointed out that they had accomplished their mission. More importantly, they had sent a very clear message to the Zentari Empire. Perhaps after seeing what one damaged human ship could do, they would think twice before picking fights with Earth vessels. Peter looked skeptical and reminded his captain that in his experience empires did not react well to being humiliated. Pride was a powerful motivator, and the Zentari had just lost a major warship to what they thought was a primitive species. Logic suggested they would respond with overwhelming force rather than caution. Linda sighed and admitted that Peter was probably right. She ordered him to prepare a detailed report for Earth Command, including all the sensor data from the battle and the communication logs with Commander Vexthal. Fleet Command needed to know immediately that humanity had made first contact with a hostile empire, and that more conflict was likely coming. Peter asked if his captain thought the Zentari would actually come looking for Earth. Linda stared at the navigation display showing the route they had taken through space. She explained that pride was indeed universal among intelligent species, and the Empire had just suffered a wound to theirs. They would come searching for revenge and probably with enough ships to ensure victory. The chief engineer wanted to know if Earth would be ready for a major attack. Linda's expression turned grim as she considered the question. She said that Earth was always ready, because humanity had learned the hard way never to be unprepared. The question was not whether Earth could defend itself, but whether the Zentari truly understood what they were about to walk into. Peter stood up to head back to engineering, but paused at the doorway. He asked what would happen if the Empire came with hundreds of ships instead of just 20 or 30. Linda looked at him with the same dangerous expression she had shown Commander Vexthal. She said quietly that the Zentari would learn the same lesson that every aggressor in human history had eventually learned. That lesson was simple and brutal. Humans could be peaceful and reasonable and willing to compromise on almost anything, but when someone threatened Earth or attacked human ships without provocation, they discovered that humanity had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of war. Every mistake and every tragedy in their violent history had taught them how to fight and how to win. The Wanderer's engines powered up again as they prepared to make the long journey back to Earth. Linda knew that the Empire would be coming soon and that everything was about to change. Humanity had just announced its presence to the galaxy by bloodying the nose of a major power. Some species would see that as an opportunity, while others would see it as a threat that needed to be eliminated. But Earth would be ready, because that was what humans did best. They survived and they adapted and they protected what was theirs, with a ferocity that surprised anyone who mistook their preference for peace as weakness. 3 weeks after the encounter with the Wanderer, the Zentari battle group emerged from faster-than-light travel at the coordinates their intelligence had extracted from the damaged dreadnought's sensor logs. Admiral Corseth stood on the bridge of his flagship called the Inevitable Conquest, surrounded by holographic displays showing all 20 warships in perfect formation. The fleet included 5 dreadnoughts, 8 heavy cruisers, and 7 support vessels, carrying enough firepower to conquer an entire star system. Corseth ordered his scanning officers to locate the human homeworld and begin detailed analysis of their defensive capabilities. The admiral expected to find a primitive civilization with maybe a few orbital platforms and some outdated defensive satellites. In his mind, this would be a quick demonstration of Zentari superiority followed by immediate surrender. The chief scanning officer worked in silence for several minutes before looking up with confusion on his face. He reported detecting only one inhabited planet in the system, but the readings were extremely unusual. The planet was heavily industrialized with thousands of artificial satellites in orbit. There were also multiple large structures floating in space that did not match any known civilian designs. Corseth asked about defensive installations, but the officer could not provide clear answers. There was massive electromagnetic interference coming from the planet, and its orbital space making detailed scans almost impossible. The technology generating that interference was sophisticated enough to blind Zentari sensors without being obviously hostile. The admiral felt a small flicker of doubt, but pushed it aside quickly. For a supposedly primitive species, the humans certainly had developed infrastructure, but 20 Zentari warships could handle any resistance. He had fought battles against species with far more advanced technology, and always emerged victorious through superior tactics and overwhelming force. Corseth ordered his communication officer to broadcast a message on all frequencies demanding immediate surrender. The message was translated by the Empire's universal language computers and transmitted repeatedly toward the planet. For several long minutes there was only silence as the fleet waited for a response. Then the view screen activated, showing a human male wearing a crisp green uniform with gold symbols on the shoulders. The man had gray hair and sharp blue eyes that reminded Corseth uncomfortably of the report about Captain Linda Hayes. His expression was calm and professional as he looked directly at the Admiral. The human introduced himself as Admiral Henry Clark and identified his position as commander of UE, Earth's defense fleet. He stated clearly that the Zentari had entered United Earth space without authorization and requested that they state their intentions immediately. The tone was not fearful or submissive, but rather businesslike, as if this was a routine border incident. Corseth felt anger rise in his chest at the human's casual tone. He announced his name and title, before declaring that the human species had attacked a Zentari vessel without provocation. The Admiral demanded immediate and unconditional surrender, or he would destroy every ship and orbital platform in the system. The threat was delivered with the full authority of someone who had never failed to achieve his objectives. Henry Clark's expression did not change at all. He calmly stated that he had reviewed the incident logs from Captain Hayes and the facts were clear. The Zentari commander had fired first after the human captain requested peaceful passage. That was not provocation, but rather legitimate self-defense under any reasonable definition. Corseth tried to interrupt, but the human admiral kept speaking. Henry said he did not care what the Zentari Empire demanded or expected. They had entered human space with a battle fleet and issued threats which constituted an act of war under Earth law. He was giving the Zentari one chance to turn their ships around and leave immediately. If they refused, then Earth would respond with appropriate force. The admiral laughed at what he considered an absurd ultimatum. He told the human that there was no possible way they could comprehend the forces arrayed against them. The Zentari fleet could glass their entire planet from orbit, and there was nothing Earth could do to stop it. The arrogance of this primitive species was almost entertaining. Henry Clark spoke very quietly when he replied. He said the Zentari could certainly try to attack Earth, but they would not like what happened next. Then he ended the transmission before Corseth could respond. The view screen went dark, leaving the Admiral staring at empty space while feeling insulted and furious. Corseth shouted orders for all ships to move to battle stations. He commanded the fleet to advance toward the orbital platforms and prepare to engage any defensive systems. The Zentari warships moved forward in their practiced formation with weapons charging and shields at maximum strength. They would show these humans the price of defying the Empire. The fleet passed several orbital structures that appeared to be simple mining stations and cargo transfer points. Nothing reacted to their presence, and the platforms seemed completely defenseless. Corseth began to think this would be even easier than expected. Perhaps all the human posturing had been nothing but empty words. Then everything changed in an instant. Space around the Zentari fleet suddenly filled with energy signatures, as dozens of hidden platforms dropped their stealth fields simultaneously. What the Zentari had thought were harmless mining stations revealed themselves as heavily armed weapons platforms, bristling with guns and missile batteries. The deception had been perfect, and now the Empire's fleet was surrounded. Corseth screamed orders for evasive maneuvers, but the humans had planned their ambush with deadly precision. The platforms opened fire all at once, creating a storm of weapons fire that converged on the Zentari ships from multiple directions. Railgun projectiles, moving at incredible speeds, tore through shields and armor. Like they were made of paper, missiles swarmed the fleet in numbers that overwhelmed every point defense system. 3 Zentari cruisers exploded in the first 10 seconds of combat. The dreadnought called Fury of the Stars took a direct hit from multiple railgun rounds, and its entire port side was torn away. The massive ship began spinning out of control as secondary explosions rippled through its hull. Crew members were vented into space through the gaping holes. Corseth ordered the fleet to return fire immediately. Every Zentari ship unleashed their full arsenals of particle beams and plasma torpedoes at the nearest platforms. Several human installations exploded in brilliant flashes of light and debris, but for every platform destroyed, 2 more seemed to decloak and join the battle. The humans had hidden far more defenses than anyone could have anticipated. Then the human warships arrived, and everything got worse. They came from behind the planet's moon, moving fast and aggressive like predators that had been waiting for prey. The ships were smaller than Zentari dreadnoughts, but they moved with impossible agility, dodging incoming fire while closing the distance rapidly. Their hulls were dark and seemed to absorb sensor scans, making them hard to track. The lead human vessel had the designation UES Defiant painted on its hull. It carved through the Zentari formation like a blade through flesh. Its railguns fired in rapid succession, and each shot was perfectly aimed at critical systems. The carrier Eternal Light took multiple hits to its ammunition storage areas, and massive explosions tore the ship apart from inside. Another human ship called the UES Vengeance flanked the inevitable conquest and unleashed a barrage of missiles that the flagship's defenses could not stop. Korseth felt his ship shudder as explosions walked across the hull, breaching compartments and knocking out weapon systems. Damage reports flooded in faster than his crew could process them. The Admiral stared at his tactical display in complete horror. In less than 5 minutes, his fleet had been reduced to half strength. The humans were not just defeating them, but systematically dismantling his forces with terrifying efficiency. Every shot they fired seemed to hit exactly where it would cause maximum damage. Every maneuver they made put them in the perfect position to exploit Zentari. Weaknesses. Korseth shouted orders for the fleet to retreat, but before he could finish the sentence, a railgun round punched through the inevitable Conquest's reactor shielding. The engines exploded in a cascade of energy that tore through the aft sections of the ship. Emergency systems kicked in as main power failed, and the bridge went dark except for emergency lighting. The Admiral felt his command chair eject him into an escape pod as the ship's computer determined the flagship was no longer survivable. He had just enough time to see the human fleet moving forward, not to finish off survivors, but to begin rescue operations. They were saving Zentari crew members from the wreckage even while the battle was still ongoing in other sectors. As his pod drifted away from the dying flagship, Korseth understood with crushing certainty that the Empire had made a terrible mistake. The humans had not just won the battle, but had done so while showing mercy to defeated enemies. That kind of restrained superiority was more terrifying than simple destruction would have been. The emergency session of the Imperial Council was unlike anything in the 3,000-year history of the Zentari Empire. High Chancellor Mirakor stood in the center of the chamber, rather than sitting in her elevated position. Her body language showed shock and disbelief as surviving officers from the battle gave their reports through holographic projection. The council chamber that usually echoed with confident declarations was now filled with stunned silence. Admiral Korseth stood, with his head bowed in shame after being rescued from his escape pod by a human recovery ship. Around him, holographic displays showed the aftermath of the battle, with images of twisted wreckage floating in space around Earth. The Zentari had lost 15 ships completely destroyed, and the remaining 5 were so damaged they could barely maintain life support. Over 12,000 Zentari warriors had died in less than an hour of combat. Councillor Drakmar spoke in a whisper, asking how 20 of their finest warships could be destroyed so quickly. His voice carried none of the arrogance and confidence that had filled it during the previous council session. The reality of what had happened was slowly sinking in, and it terrified everyone present. Commander Vexthal stepped forward from where he had been quietly observing. He reminded the council that he had tried to warn them about the humans. The species was not primitive, and they were definitely not unprepared for conflict. Everything about their behavior suggested a civilization that had been expecting war for a very long time. Another counselor protested weakly, saying that their intelligence had indicated humans only achieved faster-than-light travel recently. How could such a young spacefaring species have developed weapons that could overwhelm Zentari defenses so completely? The technology should not have been possible for a civilization at their level of development. A new voice entered the conversation as a Zentari scientist named Kelvor was projected into the chamber. He had spent the past week studying wreckage recovered from the battle and analyzing every piece of data the surviving ships had recorded. His findings were disturbing and would change everything the Empire thought they knew about humanity. Kelvor began his report by explaining that human weapons were not actually more advanced than Zentari technology. In terms of basic physics, their railguns were electromagnetic accelerators that used principles the Empire had understood for thousands of years. Their missiles used conventional chemical propulsion and explosive warheads. Even their reactors were fusion-based, power systems that were theoretically inferior to Zentari antimatter generators. Mirakor demanded to know why their weapons were so effective if the technology was not superior. Kelvor pulled up detailed specifications that made several counselors gasp in shock. The human railguns fired solid metal slugs at 97% of the speed of light. The kinetic energy from projectiles moving that fast was enough to penetrate any shielding the Empire had ever developed. It was not advanced technology, but rather extreme engineering pushed to theoretical limits. The scientist continued, explaining that human missiles were controlled by artificial intelligence systems far more sophisticated than anything the Zentari used. Each missile could make thousands of tactical calculations per second, allowing them to dodge point defense fire and select optimal impact points. The humans had not invented new physics, but they had perfected the application of known principles. Kelvor then showed structural analysis of the human warships recovered from debris fields. Every vessel was designed with redundant systems and armored compartments throughout the hull. Damage control capabilities exceeded anything in the Zentari fleet by orders of magnitude. The humans did not build ships, expecting easy victories, but rather built them to take punishment and keep fighting. Vex Thal nodded slowly and added that this matched what he had observed during his encounter with Captain Linda Hayes. The Wanderer had been heavily damaged but remained fully operational, because every critical system had backup power and redundant controls. Human engineering philosophy was completely different from the Empire's approach. Kelvor saved his most disturbing finding for last. He revealed that they had intercepted some internal communications between human ships during the battle. One captain named Sophie Blake had requested permission to use weapons called kinetic bombardment munitions. Admiral Henry Clark had denied the request, stating that the destruction would be excessive for the situation. The chamber fell completely silent as everyone processed what that meant. The humans had weapons they considered too powerful to use against the Zentari fleet. They had defeated 20 warships while deliberately holding back their most destructive capabilities. The implications were terrifying because it meant everything they had seen was just a fraction of human military power. Mirakor slowly sank back into her seat, looking older and more tired than she had in decades. She asked Commander Vexthal what he recommended they do now. The pride and arrogance that had defined her leadership was gone, replaced by the cold reality of facing an opponent they could not defeat. Vexthal spoke clearly and firmly. He said the Empire needed to make immediate diplomatic contact with humanity. There should be no threats and no demands, just honest communication between equals. They needed to understand what they were dealing with, and more importantly, they needed to make sure the humans understood the Empire was willing to negotiate peace. Drakmar started to protest, saying that the Empire did not negotiate with inferior species. Vexthal cut him off harshly and stated that the Empire was about to be at war with a species that could destroy their fleets easily. Pride meant nothing if they were all dead. They either negotiated or faced extinction. Several counselors tried to speak at once, but Mirakor raised her hand for silence. She made her decision with the weight of the Empire's survival on her shoulders. The High Chancellor ordered that a diplomatic envoy be sent to Earth immediately. The ship would be unarmed with no military escort whatsoever. Only the Empire's most skilled negotiators would be aboard, and they would carry a message requesting peaceful negotiations. Thal was appointed to accompany the diplomatic mission as military advisor, since he was the only officer who had survived a direct encounter with human forces. The former commander accepted the assignment, knowing that the future of the entire Empire might depend on his ability to help negotiate a treaty. As the council began organizing the diplomatic mission, Vexthal felt cautious. Hope for the first time since his encounter with the Wanderer. The Empire was finally learning humility, and that might save them all. He could only pray that the humans would be willing to give them a chance at peace. Far away on Earth, Admiral Henry Clark sat in his office at Fleet Command reviewing reports from the battle. His second-in-command, Captain Lisa Warren, stood across from him, holding a tablet with casualty figures and damage assessments. The battle had gone exactly as planned, with minimal losses on the human side. Lisa reported that final casualty count showed 0 human fatalities and only 18 wounded personnel. All injuries were minor, and everyone would make full recovery within weeks. They had recovered over 4,000 Zentari survivors from escape pods and wreckage. Medical teams were working continuously to treat the injured aliens and provide them with appropriate accommodations. Henry nodded with satisfaction and asked about the diplomatic message the Empire had sent. Lisa confirmed that it had arrived an hour ago, requesting permission to send an unarmed envoy to Earth. The tone was completely different from the arrogant demands Admiral Korseth had made before the battle. This time the Zentari were asking politely and offering genuine negotiations. The Admiral leaned back in his chair and said they should grant permission for the diplomatic vessel to approach. Humanity was willing to give peace a real chance, but they needed to remain cautious. He ordered Lisa to keep all defense platforms active and the fleet on standby alert. They would negotiate in good faith, but never from a position of weakness. Lisa smiled slightly and reminded her commander that he had always said once, "A warrior, always a warrior." Henry agreed and turned to look out his window at the orbital shipyards visible above the planet. Dozens of new warships were under construction. Because Earth had learned never to assume peace would last forever, the galaxy was a dangerous place, and humanity had just announced its presence by defeating a major empire. Some species would want to be allies, while others would see humans as threats. Earth needed to be ready for whatever came next, because that was what humans did best. They prepared and they adapted, and they survived no matter what challenges the universe threw at them. The Zentari diplomatic vessel approached Earth's orbital space 3 days after receiving permission to enter the system. The ship was called the Olive Branch, which was a name the humans had suggested during preliminary communications. Ambassador Telvari stood on the bridge watching Earth grow larger on the view screen, and feeling nervous in a way he had not experienced. In his 50 years of diplomatic service, Commander Vexthal stood beside the ambassador looking at the blue and green planet with genuine appreciation. He remarked that Earth was beautiful and reminded him of what Zentara Prime had looked like before centuries of industrial expansion covered most of the surface. The planet below them showed careful management with large areas of natural wilderness preserved alongside developed regions. Telvari agreed and noted that managing a planet's ecosystem while supporting a large population required both technology and wisdom. According to the information they had gathered, humans had nearly destroyed their own environment several centuries ago, but had pulled back from disaster. It took significant cultural change to recognize the need for balance and actually implement it. The communication system activated and a human voice welcomed them professionally. Earth Traffic Control cleared the Olive Branch for approach to Diplomatic Station Alpha and provided specific flight coordinates. The instructions were courteous but firm, and the underlying message was clear that any deviation from the designated path would be met with immediate response. The diplomatic vessel docked smoothly at the station, and when the airlock opened, Ambassador Telvari and Commander Vexthal were greeted by a small human delegation. Admiral Henry Clark stood at the center wearing his formal uniform with another officer beside him and a woman in civilian clothes who was introduced as Secretary of State Margaret Cole. The humans extended their hands in the greeting gesture that Zentari diplomats had studied during the journey. Henry welcomed them to Earth and expressed regret that their first contact had not been more peaceful. His tone was professional and showed no arrogance despite the overwhelming military victory his forces had achieved. Telvari carefully grasped the Admiral's hand, noting the controlled strength in the human's grip. The ambassador stated clearly that the fault for the conflict lay entirely with the Zentari Empire. They had come as conquerors and had been justly defeated. He was present to ensure such foolish aggression would never be repeated. The direct acknowledgement of responsibility seemed to surprise the humans slightly, but Henry simply nodded and invited them to a conference room. The conference room had large windows overlooking Earth, which rotated slowly below them. The view was deliberately symbolic, showing the Zentari exactly what they had attempted to threaten. As everyone settled around a table, Telvari noticed that despite the military victory, the humans were not acting triumphant or superior, but rather professional and businesslike. Henry began the discussion by stating that humanity had no interest in conquering the Zentari Empire or any other civilization. Earth had spent 2 centuries building a peaceful, united world after thousands of years of internal conflict. They had explored their local region of space and established 4 colony worlds. Their primary goal was ensuring that no hostile force could threaten their home or their people. Telvari acknowledged that human defensive capabilities were remarkable beyond anything the Empire had encountered. He admitted that Zentari analysts still did not fully understand how humans had achieved such devastating military effectiveness with technology that seemed conventional. The ambassador was genuinely curious about how a relatively young spacefaring species had developed such sophisticated weapons. Margaret explained that humanity had excellent teachers in the form of their own history. Humans had fought countless wars among themselves over 10,000 years of recorded civilization. They learned what tactics worked and what technologies were most effective through painful trial and error. When Earth finally achieved unity, they took all that, accumulated knowledge, and focused it on defending their species. Henry added with slight humor that humans had also learned from their science fiction stories. For centuries before achieving space travel, they had imagined every possible threat that might come from the stars. Writers and filmmakers had created scenarios involving alien invasions and hostile empires. When humanity finally reached space, they were prepared for dangers both real and imagined. Vexthal leaned forward and asked why Captain Hayes had shown restraint when she could have destroyed his ship completely. He also wanted to know why human forces began rescue operations during the battle before fighting had even ended. The Zentari had attacked without provocation, yet humans treated defeated enemies with mercy. Henry's expression became serious as he explained that humanity remembered what it was like to lose wars and face destruction. Their history was filled with conflicts where entire populations were slaughtered and cultures were erased. Humans had decided that when they reached the stars, they would do better than their ancestors. They would defend themselves without hesitation, but would not commit atrocities in the name of victory. Margaret added that most species viewed defeated enemies as either resources to exploit or threats to eliminate. Humans had spent thousands of years making that same mistake before learning a better way. There was an old human saying that those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. Earth remembered every tragedy and every unnecessary death, which made them more careful about how they used their power. The conversation continued for many hours as both sides shared information and began building understanding. Telvari and Vexthal learned about human art and music and philosophy. They discovered the incredible diversity of cultures that had somehow united under a single planetary government. The path to unity had been long and painful, but humans had achieved something the Zentari Empire had never managed, which was cooperation without conquest. In return, the Zentari diplomats shared information about their empire and the complex network of species and alliances that made up known space. The Empire controlled 83 star systems and had relationships with dozens of other civilizations. The galactic community was vast, with hundreds of species at different levels of technological and social development. Telvari explained that humanity's arrival would complicate galactic politics significantly. The ambassador said this carefully, trying to prepare the humans for what was coming. Earth had demonstrated that the Zentari Empire was not invincible, and other species would take notice. Some civilizations that resented imperial dominance might see humans as potential allies. Others might view Earth as a dangerous threat that needed to be eliminated before growing stronger. Henry stated quietly that anyone who wanted to test human defenses was welcome to try. Earth was not looking for conflict, but they were absolutely ready for it. The calm certainty in his voice made it clear this was not a boast but a simple statement of fact. Telvari believed him completely and said he would recommend that the Imperial Council offer humanity a formal treaty. The relationship would be between equals rather than the usual arrangement where client species served the Empire. Such a treaty was unprecedented in Zentari history, but then humanity itself was unprecedented. Margaret walked to the window and looked down at Earth turning below them. She explained that humanity's primary concern was protecting their home and their colonies. Humans were not interested in galactic power struggles or political games. They simply wanted to be left alone to live their lives in peace. Telvari acknowledged that this was a reasonable position, though he suspected the galaxy would not make peace easy. Other species and empires would eventually seek contact with Earth, and not all of them would come with friendly intentions. The universe was dangerous, and humanity had just announced its presence in a very dramatic way. Henry agreed that nothing worthwhile was ever easy. Over the following days, the diplomatic meetings continued, and Telvari and Vexthal were given tours of Earth. They saw carefully, preserved natural wilderness areas and massive cities that reached toward the sky. They visited orbital shipyards where new vessels were under construction at an impressive rate. On the final day, Vexthal stood with Admiral Henry Clark on an observation deck watching Earth rotate peacefully below them. The commander said that humans had built something remarkable here. They had created a united world with powerful defenses and most importantly, a clear sense of purpose. The Zentari Empire could learn valuable lessons from humanity. Henry replied that the Zentari had already learned the most important lesson, which was not to underestimate humans. He suggested that perhaps Earth could teach them other lessons about strength that came from knowing what you were protecting, rather than what you could conquer. Bexthal's mandibles clicked, in what might have been laughter as he said that a philosophical warrior was exactly what the galaxy needed. Humanity would definitely complicate galactic politics in ways no one could predict as the Zentari diplomatic vessel departed carrying a draft treaty and new understanding of humanity. Admiral Clark stood with his officers, watching the ship jump to faster-than-light travel. Captain Lisa Warren asked if he thought the Empire would honor their agreement. Henry said the Empire probably would because they had learned their lesson the hard way. But the